There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. So last week, we saw that Jacob, he had called his son Joseph to come to him because Jacob, he was sick. And Jacob, he knew he was dying. And Joseph, he immediately went and he brought his two sons with him, knowing that this would be the last time that he would see his father on earth. And Jacob and Joseph, a father and a son, they were given this private time together before calling the other 11 brothers in. And they were able to reminisce about times that they shared together in life. And Jacob is telling Joseph, and we saw that Jacob, he told Joseph that he was giving him the birthright by blessing him and giving him the double portion. And we saw that the way he was doing this was by adopting Joseph's two sons that would give Joseph twice the inheritance among his 11 brothers. And this was more than just a spiritual blessing. It was also a physical blessing. But they would never see it. None of this family would ever be physically inheriting the land of Canaan. And that wouldn't happen for another 470 years. Because the children of Israel will be spending the next 430 years in slavery in the land of Egypt. And then they're going to be spending another 40 years wandering the wilderness with Moses. And so this inheritance, it's in faith. It's faith that God will do the things that He says He'll do. And that's exactly the same as it is for us. For our inheritance in heaven is also in faith. And it's based on the promises of God that He will do for us what He says He'll do for us. And so now Jacob, he calls the other 11 brothers in. And you have to remember that these other 11 brothers, they all live around there. It was only Joseph who had to come from a far distance from the city. And Jacob, he's going to tell them what's going to happen to their descendants of their individual tribes in the last days. And this phrase that he uses, in the last days, is not like the way we use the term in the last days. Jacob, he's not talking about the end times. The way that Jacob is using this here, he's just telling them about their descendants' future, a prophecy, what will happen to the people later. It's not talking about the end times. And this is the first prophecy ever spoken by a man in the Bible about future events. And so Jacob, he begins, and in his very first sentence, he calls himself both Jacob and Israel. And he says, "Hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father." And then he starts with the natural birth order. And so he begins with Reuben. And he tells us right away that there was nothing wrong with Reuben. There was nothing wrong with him physically. There was nothing wrong with him intellectually. Reuben, he had it all. And Jacob, he speaks of how proud he was of Reuben, his firstborn son. And he calls him excellent, and he calls him powerful, that he's the beginning of his strength. And so you can kind of imagine Reuben sitting there and smiling. But then Jacob says, he won't excel. And for these first three sons of Jacob, they're going to learn that their past conduct cost them their future inheritance, and that their descendants are going to actually reap what their fathers have sown. And so this is where Reuben is told that he lost the privilege of being the firstborn son, and that it had been given to Joseph and his two sons. And this is all because of that affair that Reuben had with Bilhah, his stepmother. And that was right after Rachel died. And you have to remember, this is over 50 years ago. And that this one act of lust and passion, well, it cost him everything. It cost him his place in the family. And even though Jacob didn't say anything back then, he's saying it now. But there is something here about Reuben that I do like. Because even though Reuben had sinned and he had lost his respect in the family, he stayed around. He faced his humiliation. It would have probably been easier for Reuben to run away and to start over, to start a whole new life. But he stayed. And even though he lost the birthright, this still paid off for him. Because you have to realize, Reuben still became the father of a tribe in Israel. Many of us, we have had pasts, and we've been humiliated by things that we've done, and we've sinned, and we've had to bear that kind of price. And sometimes it may have been even in our own families. But I've seen many people, and not only just Christians, but people who, after being caught up in their sin, that they stood their ground. They didn't run away. And they tried to set things right after. And they were blessed. And they were blessed by staying, by facing their wrongs. And even though that the damage, it might not be able to be fixed, like maybe if it was like having children out of wedlock, you still have the children and you still may have struggles. Or maybe you've had an unbiblical divorce. Well, you're still divorced. But it could be anything. It could have been an affair and you lost your wife. Well, you still don't have your wife. But when people have truly repented and stopped their sinning, and they stand up and they bear their consequences, you see that the Lord has a way of restoring these people. And it may never be the perfect will that God had intended for someone's life. It might not be what he wanted for them, but it's kind of like the GPS in your car where you missed your turn and then it reroutes you and it redirects you. God does the same thing in our lives. He redirects us and he puts us back into his will and he puts us back on course to our real destination, which is life in him. And then he fills our life with many blessings and many good purposes. Okay, so now Jacob, he calls Reuben unstable as water, which means he's like turbulent water. He's like boiling water. And this is not only a weakness, but this is also a destructive nature. And these aren't the characteristics of a leader. And the truth is, there was never very many notable leaders that had come out of the tribe of Reuben. They had no prophet. There was no judge, and they never had a king. But they did have a couple of bad leaders, because you'll read in Exodus or in Numbers, there was Dathan and there was Abiram, and they were both from the tribe of Reuben. And they're the ones who rebelled against Moses along with Korah in the book of Numbers. And because of them, they had caused the death of thousands of people in Israel. And you have to look here, the tribe of Reuben, they never really ever did enter the promised land because they were content on taking their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan River. And the reason they did that is because they saw that there was a lot of grass for their cattle. And that's really not a good reason not to go into the promised land. And because of this, they were also the first ones to be taken into captivity by the Assyrians when the whole northern Israel, the 10 tribes, they were taken away when they fell into idolatry and they were exiled. And so here you have Reuben, and his sin was lust and sexual sin. But with Simon and Levi, their sin was anger and violence. And that cost them their favored son status. And Jacob, he addresses these two sons together. And these sons, they must have been close in age. And they had a bond that was an evil bond because they were co-conspirators in evil. And together, these boys were monsters. And if they had been separated from each other, they may have done all right. But these are like bad boys in a classroom where the teacher has to separate them to have any kind of order. Because these boys, they feed on each other's worst characteristics. These are the kind of boys that you find out somewhere torturing small animals. And it even tells us here that they hamstrung an ox. And hamstringing is cutting a tendon in their leg so that they can't run. And it's not for any purpose. It's just cruel, because these boys were cruel and they were violent. And we can remember what they did, of how they murdered their sister Dinah's husband, and they slaughtered every other male in Shechem, and how they took all their wealth, cattle, and they took all their women and their children, and they made them slaves. And it was all because one man mistreated their sister. And here again, this act was over 50 years ago. And Jacob's thoughts toward them, they still haven't changed. That's because their natures, they hadn't changed. And so Jacob, he wants no part in these two sons' counsel. He wants nothing to do with their violent ways. He wants to be separated from them. He wants none of their ways to be reflected on his reputation. And he makes that very clear. He says he's not like them. He doesn't share in their nature, and he doesn't approve of them. And then Jacob prophesies that they will be divided in Israel, that they'll be scattered. And that's what happened to those two tribes. They didn't inherit together. They were separated. The tribe of Simeon, when they received their inheritance, it was small. And it was a very small region, but their inheritance was only inside of Judah's large territory. And so they didn't really have a land to really call their own. And so in one way, they lost their identity of being a tribe in Israel. And they were actually absorbed into the tribe of Judah. And then now you have Levi. And you think, oh, wow, it happened so bad for Simeon. What about poor Levi? Well, in spite of Levi's cruelty and his evil nature, the Lord redeemed him. And he made his descendants a tribe of priests to God. They became God's own special inheritance inside of Israel, God's special people, his special inheritance. They became the cream of the crop. So it turned out exactly as it's been foretold here, and they were scattered throughout Israel. They were only given cities inside of the other tribes' inheritances. So they had like cities, and they were also given a little bit of farmland. But there's no place in Israel called Levi. They don't have their own separate territory. But God, he had another purpose in separating the Levites. It's because no matter where you were in Israel, you would never be very far from a priest of God. So there would always be someone to be able to make atonement for you.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.